Reagan Tokes was young, ambitious, and full of promise, but in the shadows of an ordinary night. Her path crossed with a predator who had been waiting for someone just like her. Her disappearance began as a mystery. Her discovery turned into horror, and the man behind it all revealed flaws in a system meant to protect. This is not only the story of a life stolen too soon, but of the haunting questions left behind. How could it happen, and how can it be stopped from happening again? Reagan Tokes was a young woman full of hope and promise, a college student whose life seemed to be on the path towards success. She balanced her studies with a part-time job at a local restaurant, often working long hours but never letting exhaustion dull her determination. On one winter evening, she finished her shift as usual, stepping out into the dark parking lot. The air was sharp and cold, her breath visible as she walked toward her car. At first glance, it was an ordinary moment, the kind that repeated countless times in her daily routine. Yet this time, something felt different. The lot was quiet, unusually empty, the faint buzz of the street lamps above providing little comfort. The silence stretched around her, heavy and unsettling, as though the night itself was holding its breath. Friends and family expected her to return home within the hour. They knew her habits well. She was not the kind of person to vanish without explanation. She was responsible, considerate, and always kept in touch. But as the minutes stretched into hours, worry began to creep in. Her phone went unanswered, texts left unread. The clock ticked past midnight, and what should have been a simple commute began to feel like the beginning of something far more troubling. Somewhere between her workplace and home, Reagan had disappeared without a trace. When morning came, her absence could no longer be ignored. Panic grew with each attempt to reach her. Calls went straight to voicemail, and her social media showed no activity. Her friends retraced her steps, checking in with people who had seen her at work, asking anyone if they had caught sight of her after she left. The answer was always the same. She walked out into the night, and then nothing. It was as though she had been swallowed whole by the darkness. Investigators were quickly brought in as the disappearance gained attention. They searched the areas surrounding her workplace, questioning staff and reviewing surveillance footage. From nearby buildings, the cameras showed Reagan leaving as expected, crossing the lot toward her car. Yet beyond that, there was nothing. No sign of her getting into the car, no evidence of her driving away. The car itself was missing, an ominous detail that deepened the mystery. For her loved ones, every new hour without answers felt like an eternity. They clung to the hope that she might still be safe somewhere, perhaps stranded or in need of help. But deep down, an unshakable fear was beginning to take hold. By late afternoon, the search intensified. Volunteers gathered to canvass the city, calling out her name, checking wooded areas and empty fields. Posters were printed with her photo, her smile frozen in time as her disappearance spread across news stations and online feeds. Strangers shared her story, moved by the suddenness of it all, the way an ordinary evening could twist into tragedy. Her disappearance seemed almost impossible to comprehend. How could someone like Reagan, in a familiar place, surrounded by people who cared for her, simply vanish? The more people thought about it, the more disturbing the silence became. The night of her disappearance became the first chapter in a chilling story that no one expected, a story that began with routine and ended in mystery. The parking lot where she had last been seen turned into a haunting reminder of unanswered questions. The quiet darkness that once seemed harmless now carried a different weight, one that spoke of danger lurking unseen. The world around her continued to move forward, but for her family, friends, and the growing community of supporters, time had stopped on that night. Each detail was studied, each possibility considered, but nothing could explain the terrifying truth that Reagan Tokes was gone, and no one knew where she was or what had happened in those final fleeting moments. The morning after Reagan's disappearance carried a heaviness that was impossible to ignore. Her friends and family, already restless from a night without sleep, began spreading the word that she was missing. Calls were made, messages sent, and soon her name was being spoken with worry across campus and throughout the community.
What?
Had started as an unsettling silence, now grew into a collective fear. Every hour without contact chipped away at hope, raising the possibility that something truly terrible had happened. The police joined the search, moving quickly to trace her last known movements. The first lead came from her workplace. Her coworkers confirmed she had left her shift as usual, heading toward the parking lot just after closing. Security footage provided a chilling but limited view. The grainy images showed Reagan stepping into the cold night, her figure illuminated briefly by overhead lights, before she moved toward her car. Beyond that moment, there was nothing more. No sign of her. Entering the vehicle, no indication of where she might have gone. It was as though the darkness had swallowed her whole. Investigators expanded their search outward, combing nearby streets and questioning anyone who might have been in the area. Each answer came back the same. No one had seen her after she left work. Her car became the next critical piece of the puzzle. After hours of searching, it was located several miles away, abandoned near a quiet park. The sight of it sent a wave of dread through those who had hoped for a simpler explanation. The vehicle appeared undisturbed. No shattered glass, no obvious signs of struggle. Inside, her belongings were neatly placed, as though she had intended to return at any moment. Yet the driver's seat told a different story, with faint traces. That suggested someone else may have been there. The car's presence so far from her workplace added another layer of mystery. Why would she abandon it in such a location? Was she driven there willingly, or had someone else taken control? News spread, the community rallied. Volunteers poured in to join the search, walking through fields, wooded areas, and deserted roadsides in hopes of finding a clue. Flyers were taped to poles and storefront windows, her photos shared across social media with urgent pleas for information. Strangers who had never met her began to feel the weight of her absence, her face becoming a symbol of innocence caught in danger. With every passing hour, the sense of urgency grew. Police hotlines filled with calls, some offering possible sightings, others providing vague tips that only led to dead ends. Investigators carefully pieced together a timeline of her last hours. But gaps remained hauntingly wide and unexplainable. They considered every possibility: a planned meeting, a sudden accident, or a deliberate abduction. The lack of evidence made each theory both possible and fragile. While they worked methodically, the community's imagination filled in the blanks. With fearful speculation, people whispered about a predator lurking in the area, someone who might have been watching her that night, waiting for the moment when she was alone. Her family struggled with the growing fear. They had no answers, only questions that multiplied with each update from police. The car's discovery confirmed she hadn't simply run away, but it also offered no clear direction for the search. Days blurred together as investigators chased, leads that dissolved into nothing. Every new report carried the possibility of a breakthrough, but instead it only deepened the sense of dread. The silence of her phone, the emptiness of her home, and the cold seat of her abandoned car were the only clues. And they told a story no one wanted to believe. As the search continued, the truth remained hidden, just out of reach. What had started as an ordinary evening for Reagan had become a nightmare that gripped her family and community. The unanswered questions, the growing fear, and the haunting image of her walking into the night were all that remained. Beneath the surface of a city trying to move forward, there was now an undercurrent of unease, a realization that danger could strike without warning, and that Reagan's disappearance was only the beginning of something far more sinister. Days after Reagan's car was discovered, the investigation took a grim turn. A search party moving through the outskirts of the city came across something that confirmed everyone's worst fears. In a secluded area not far from the abandoned vehicle, her body was found. The discovery silenced hope in an instant, replacing it with heartbreak that rippled across the community. News spread quickly, and with it came the crushing reality that the story was no longer about finding a missing young woman alive, but about uncovering what had happened to her in those final hours. The location where she was found raised disturbing questions. It was not a place people stumbled upon by accident. It was quiet, removed from busy streets, the kind of spot chosen by someone who did not want to be seen. Investigators studied every inch of the area, searching for signs that could reveal the movements of both Reagan and the person who had brought her there. Evidence showed she had not gone willingly, and this was no random misfortune. The details pointed toward planning, suggesting that her disappearance had been orchestrated by someone who knew how to take advantage of the shadows. Forensic teams worked carefully, gathering every clue they could find. Footprints in the dirt, tire tracks leading in and out, and small fragments of material were all collected with the hope that one of them might point toward the killer. The timeline investigators had built grew clearer. Reagan had left work, disappeared on her way to the car, and within hours was brought to this hidden place where her life ended. What remained unclear was the identity of the person behind it, The shadowy figure who seemed to vanish as quickly as they appeared. The discovery shifted the tone of the investigation. What had been a search for a missing person became a homicide case with urgency unlike any before. Detectives revisited every detail of Reagan's last night, looking for anything they might have missed. They spoke to coworkers again, reviewed security footage frame by frame, and reconstructed the path between her workplace and where the car had been left. The more they pieced together, the more unsettling the puzzle became. Someone had been watching, waiting, and then acting with precision. The community, already shaken, now felt a deeper wave of grief. Vigils were held, candles lit, and flowers placed in her memory. The sight of her smiling face on posters became harder to bear, knowing now that the hope those posters carried was gone. The tragedy connected people in sorrow, but it also ignited anger. People wanted answers, they wanted justice, and they wanted to know who had done this to a young woman with so much ahead of her. Investigators began to suspect that this was not the work of a first-time offender. The way the crime was carried out suggested experience, a disturbing familiarity with control and concealment. Detectives started to dig into the backgrounds of people with violent histories in the area, looking for patterns that might match the case. Names emerged, each one carrying its own dark history, but no clear evidence tied anyone directly to Reagan's death. It was a race against time, because the longer the suspect remained unidentified, the more fear grew that he might strike again. The chilling reality set in that Reagan had crossed paths with someone dangerous at the wrong moment. Predator had been out there blending into the ordinary world until the opportunity presented itself. A discovery of her body marked a turning point in the investigation, but it was also a reminder of how fragile safety could be. What seemed like a routine evening had ended in horror, and the question of who had taken her life now became the driving force of every lead. Every interview and every hour that passed in the search for justice, the investigation gained sharper. Focus after Reagan's body was found. Detectives began sifting through every piece of evidence, and slowly a picture of the suspect began to emerge. Tire tracks from the secluded site where she was discovered were compared against known offenders in the area. Forensic results pointed toward a specific type of vehicle, narrowing the list of potential owners. At the same time, analysis of Reagan's car revealed traces of DNA that did not belong to her. These fragments, though small, gave investigators the first tangible link to a man who had lived under the radar despite a troubling history. As they delved deeper, suspect's past became impossible to ignore. He was not an ordinary citizen caught in an extraordinary crime. His background revealed a series of violent offenses, crimes that should have kept him behind bars. Yet due to gaps in the system, he had walked free, blending back into society, as though the slate had been wiped clean. The more detectives uncovered, the more disturbing the timeline became. He'd roamed unnoticed, a predator disguised as an everyday figure, waiting for another opportunity. Reagan's case had been that. Chance the man lived not far from where Reagan's car was abandoned, a detail that placed him squarely within the sphere of suspicion. Neighbors described him as quiet, reserved, someone who kept to himself. Few people questioned his presence, and even fewer knew about his criminal past. Investigators, however, quickly pieced together a chilling profile. He was methodical, someone who understood how to watch and wait before making his move. The way Reagan had been targeted showed patience, planning, and confidence that he could get away without being caught. Detectives began mapping his movements in the days surrounding Reagan's disappearance. Surveillance cameras in the area captured glimpses of his car, sometimes only seconds long, but enough to raise suspicions. Records confirmed that he had been near her workplace on the night she vanished. Cell phone data tied him to locations that matched the crime scene. Each fragment of evidence tightened the net, transforming suspicion into certainty. Still, they needed undeniable proof, the kind that would hold in court and bring justice without question. The arrest, when it came, was swift. Officers surrounded his residence, knowing they were closing in on a man capable of unpredictable violence. Inside, they found traces that connected him directly to Reagan. Clothing fibers matched what had been discovered on her, and DNA confirmed beyond doubt that he had been in her car. Confronted with the evidence, the image of a quiet neighbor dissolved, replaced by the reality of a predator who had walked freely among them. For the community, the revelation was devastating. People questioned how someone with such a violent past had been allowed back into society, free to harm again. The knowledge that the system had failed to contain him sparked outrage. Reagan's death was no longer just a personal tragedy. It became a symbol of a wider flaw, proof that lives could be lost when dangerous individuals slipped through the cracks. Anger mingled with grief as vigils turned into calls for reform. The name of the suspect whispered with disdain while Reagan's memory was held with reverence. The investigation revealed even darker truths. This was not a man who acted in sudden anger or desperation. He had been searching for control, for the chance to dominate another life, and he had found that opportunity in Reagan. The evidence painted a horrifying picture of a calculated attack, carried out with chilling composure. For detectives who had worked tirelessly, the capture brought relief. But it also carried the heavy weight of knowing that justice could never undo what had been done.
Ow.
Reagan's future had been stolen, and no conviction could return it. The suspect's arrest marked the end of the search, but it opened the door to painful reflection. How many warnings had been ignored? How many chances had been missed to prevent this tragedy? As the trial loomed, the focus shifted to ensuring accountability not only for the man who had taken Reagan's life, but also for the failures that had allowed him to cross her path. The shadow of the suspect would haunt the case, but the light of her memory began to shine brighter as people demanded change in her name. The arrest of the suspect gave Reagan's family and community a measure of relief, but it did not erase the pain that had settled like a heavy fog over their lives. The courtroom became the stage where every hidden detail of the crime was laid bare, and with it came emotions that cut deeper than before. Prosecutors presented the evidence in painstaking detail: the DNA from her car, the fibers that matched his clothing, the surveillance footage showing his vehicle near the scene. Each piece was another nail sealing the truth of what had been done. The jury listened as the timeline of Reagan's final hours was reconstructed, and the horror of her last moments became undeniable. The suspect showed little remorse, his expression cold and detached throughout the proceedings. This lack of humanity only deepened the anger surrounding the case. Reagan had been more than a victim. She had been a daughter, a friend, a student with dreams that would never be fulfilled. As testimony unfolded, the contrast between her life of promise and his life of destruction became impossible to ignore. The trial was not only about punishing one man, but also about exposing the failures that had allowed him to re-enter society despite a violent record. When the guilty verdict was finally delivered, the courtroom filled with a mixture of relief and sorrow. Justice had been achieved, yet it could never restore what was lost. Reagan's family embraced, their tears carrying both gratitude and grief. The community echoed these feelings, knowing that while the man responsible would never harm again, the hole left by Reagan's absence could never be filled. Her story had come to an end in the legal sense, but in reality, it was only the beginning of something larger. In the months that followed, Reagan's name became a call for change. Lawmakers began examining the cracks in the system that had allowed the suspect to walk free. Discussions turned into debates, and debates turned into action. New legislation was proposed to tighten supervision of violent offenders, ensuring that others would not be placed at risk the way Reagan had been. Her story, though rooted in tragedy, began to inspire reform that reached far beyond her community. People who had never met her found themselves advocating for safer policies in her memory, determined that her death would not be in vain. Her family worked tirelessly to keep her spirit alive. They organized foundations, scholarships, and awareness, campaigns that carried her name. Each effort was a reminder that while her life had been cut short, her impact would continue. Students who received help in her honor spoke about how they carried her story with them, silent motivation to pursue their goals with the same determination she once had. Through these acts, Reagan's presence lingered, not as a victim defined by tragedy, but as a source of strength for those who followed. The community, too, found ways to heal. Vigils became annual events, drawing crowds who lit candles and shared memories. Streets once associated with fear became places of remembrance, filled with murals and flowers left by strangers who wanted to show that she had not been forgotten. The crime had shaken the city to its core, but it had also revealed resilience. Out of pain came unity, and out of sorrow came a determination to protect others. The name Reagan Tokes became more than just a headline. It became a reminder of how fragile life can be, how quickly ordinary moments can transform into nightmares, and how justice, though necessary, can never replace what was taken. Her story resonated because it spoke to the hidden dangers that exist in everyday places, but also to the power of communities to rise after devastation. Reagan's legacy was written not only in the tragedy of her final night, but also in the strength, reform, and hope that followed. Though her life ended too soon, her memory ensured that countless others would walk a little safer, speak a little louder, and fight a little harder for change.